الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sending immense greetings and salutations upon the final Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, continuing our journey with the prophetic traditions of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, for those our brothers who may have joined us inside this blessed house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there have been a series of khutbah of reminders, firstly to myself and to respected brothers and sisters, looking at certain ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whereby we completed the 42 ahadith of Imam al-Nawawi's collection and now moved on to a hadith al-Qudsiyah, another collection of 40 ahadith narrated by the Prophet ﷺ, another form of revelation of hadith al-Qudsi, looking at these prophetic words directly from the blessed tongue of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We stopped on hadith number 5 or completed it, and now moving on to hadith number 6, whereby the previous hadith was talking about staying free from shirk, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free from any individual or individuals associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala any format. Taraktuhu wa shirkahu, I leave that individual to go and seek their reward, to seek their recompense from that individual, and I leave their actions. That's the following hadith that we want to discuss today is closely related to the concept of freeing ourselves, making our actions sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we find that many times, many actions are glorified or looked upon as being great actions, but we fail to understand the essence of all actions. The beginning and the all end of all actions is what exists inside the heart of the individual. Thus we find that these statements of the Prophet ﷺ, that many of the ulama, they begin to collect them, and even in whatever science they begin to speak about, you find them beginning to place such ahadith as a reminder to themselves and to the rest of us. Will be such ahadith as إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, indeed actions are to be judged by the actions. Many books, compendiums of ahadith that we find, encyclopedias of the hadith, begin their works in talking about this first hadith. And even we find specific topics, whether it be ulum al-Quran or ulum al-hadith, or hatta al-fiqh that we find, or sharia that we find, that some of the ulama will place this hadith right in the beginning, to remind themselves and to remind us that everything in Islam revolves around the beginning of the individual. And likewise we find other ahadith, إِنَّمَا يُبْعَثُ عَلَى نِيَّاتِهِمْ, a person will be resurrected upon their intention. The intention of the individual is how the individual will be resurrected in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يُحْشَرُ النَّاسُ عَلَى نِيَّاتِهِمْ, another wording that we find, people will be gathered, brought together on the hashr, the day of gathering, عَلَى نِيَّاتِهِمْ, upon what their intention is. So that becomes paramount for all of us to go back and to begin to understand the importance of why we carry out certain actions inside our life. وحتى بعض العلماء, some of the ulama begin to collect these ahadith, like Kitab al-Ikhlas wa Niyya, collection of all these ahadith about the importance of intention and sincerity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وحتى قد قيل, has been said by many of the fuqaha, just like you go to the zawiyah, you go to every single pillar, and you study ulum al-sharia, you study in the classical form of studying sciences, a rukn and a pillar, a person teaches you tafsir, a person teaches you lugha, a person teaches you ulum al-Quran. We all know these sciences that revolve, and you find it inside traditional masajid, hatta yawmina hada. Some of them said there should be a person, an alim, a scholar who sits in one pillar, who teaches you the importance of ikhlas, teaches you the importance of your sincerity, your intention towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And remind, indeed, the reminder benefits the believers. That the believer takes all opportunity to remind himself that in times the intention can slip of the individual. In this modern world that we find, whereby people do all sorts of actions for various reasons, or for various purposes that we find. So we need to rectify our intentions and avoid certain actions that may begin to demoralize or take away our sincerity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereby people begin to do actions for the praise of the world or for the praise of the people. The Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah, he said, when people begin to praise you, your heart doesn't change, it doesn't waver. You don't become full of yourself when people begin to praise you. And when people begin to defame you, your heart doesn't change as well. It's stagnant in your devotion towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not there looking for devotion for the praise of the people who defame you. It's devotion towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's let the Quran itself speak about those individuals who begin to derail themselves, begin to go towards the dunya, or begin to seek the praise from the dunya, or praise from the people. The Quran reiterates and reminds us inside numerous passages inside the Quran, among these passages that we find, مِنْكُمْ مَنْ يُرِيدُ الدُّنْيَا وَمِنْكُمْ مَنْ يُرِيدُ الْآخِرَةِ. From amongst you those individuals, يُرِيدُ الدُّنْيا, who want this world, وَمِنْكُمْ مَنْ يُرِيدُ الْآخِرَةِ. There's some amongst you who want the akhirah. This is how the Quran describes people of this dunya and people of the hereafter. There's people inside this dunya who only want this dunya. There's people inside this dunya who only want the akhirah. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, يُرِيدُونَ عَرَضَ الدُّنْيَا وَاللَّهُ يُرِيدُ الْآخِرَةِ. Some of us, we want a share of this dunya. But look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلِلَّهِ مَثْلُ الْأَعْلَى وَاللَّهُ يُرِيدُ الْآخِرَةِ. Allah wants for you, يَا أَيُّهَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. O believers, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want for us? Wants the akhirah for us. So some of us may begin to try to come towards the dunya. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His wisdom, in His mercy and rahmah towards the believers, still begins to remind them and drag them towards the akhirah. وَاللَّهُ يَدْعُو إِلَى دَارِ السَّلَامِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls you to Dar as-Salam, calls you to the home of total peace, total contentment. We run towards this dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blocks this dunya at times. Some of us may get frustrated and begin to think, why is the dunya not given to me? Why is the dunya made haram upon me? But maybe you should step back and begin to think, وَاللَّهُ يُرِيدُ الْآخِرَةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for this Muslim ummah, wants the akhirah, wants to store the akhirah for the believers, wants us to work for that long-term commitment, the everlasting commitment of reaping the blessings inside the akhirah. Likewise, we find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, talking about the cultivation, reaping of this dunya, of the akhirah. مَنْ كَانَ يُرِيدُ حَرْثَ الْآخِرَةِ. Whoever wants the cultivation, whoever wants the fruits, whoever wants the harvest of the hereafter, نَزِدْ لَهُ فِي حَرْثِهِ. We begin to increase in his or her cultivation. We increase in their harvest. Not the harvest of this dunya, the harvest of the akhirah. Whoever has that strong desire of the hereafter, who wants the cultivation of the fruits of the hereafter, نَزِدْ لَهُ. We begin to increase for the akhirah inside this dunya for that individual. وَمَنْ كَانَ يُرِيدُ حَرْثَ الدُّنْيَا نُؤْتِهِ مِنْهَا وَمَا لَهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنْ نَصِيبٍ. Whoever wants the harth, whoever wants the cultivation, the good things of this dunya, we will give it to that individual. وَمَا لَهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنْ نَصِيبٍ. But if you become over worried about this dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, for inside the akhirah, there's no nasib. لَيْسَ لَهُ مِنْ خَلَاقٍ. That person has no share, no portion of the hereafter is given to that individual. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, مَنْ كَانَ يُرِيدُ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا. Whoever wants this dunya وَزِينَتَهَا نُوَفِّي إِلَيْهِمْ أَعْمَالُهُمْ فِيهَا وَهُمْ فِيهَا لَا يُبْخَسُونَ. Whoever wants this dunya and wants the beautification and adornment of this dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say, I make it haram for you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I will give it to that individual. I will give them everything inside this dunya will be given to them. Nothing will be cut back from these individuals who overstrive for this dunya, and the dunya becomes their own end. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns about such individuals. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ لَيْسَ لَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ إِلَّا النَّارِ. For those individuals who just work for this dunya, inside the akhirah, the only thing for those individuals is an-nar, is the fire for such individuals. وَحَبِطَ مَا صَنَعُوا فِيهَا وَبَاطِلُ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes, we find وَحَبِطَ مَا صَنَعُوا, whatever they invented, صَنَعُوا, whatever they done inside this dunya, whatever they built, we find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions وَحَبِطَ, it's all nullified, it's all cancelled. You know, sometimes we begin to look at marvel at this dunya, we look at the buildings, we look at the infrastructure, we look at all of this, and we begin to remember it at times. In front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَحَبِطَ مَا صَنَعُوا, whatever they built, whatever they've constructed, it's all nullified. And inside the hereafter, there will be nothing for these individuals given to them. وَبَاطِلُ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ, and every action they've done upon this dunya is batil. It's false, will not be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as a person could argue that these statements inside the Quran are general, they're concerning non-Muslims in general. That is partially true, but at the same time it refers back to us Muslims as well. And thus we find that certain ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which talk about specifically warning us Muslims to rectify our intentions, to rectify our lives before we begin to look at those other concepts inside our lives. We find certain traditions or certain statements, like Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he mentioned, رُبَّ عَمَلٍ كَبِيرٍ رُبَّ عَمَلٍ كَبِيرٍ يُصَغِّرُهُ النِّيَّةِ. You find perhaps a great big action that people begin to marvel at. يُصَغِّرُهُ النِّيَّةِ, the intention makes it a small action. وَرُبَّ عَمَلٍ صَغِيرٍ يُكَبِّرُهُ النِّيَّةِ. You find perhaps a person has a small action inside their life, but that intention, it multiplies it many times over. This is the essence that some of us we fail to understand. A great big action a person can do inside their life, but they don't have the right intention, it becomes a minimal action, a minimal reward, or even no reward at all. Person can do a small action inside their life, but that what exists inside their heart, the intention is multiplied many times over, and the reward becomes magnified in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as yesterday and today we find many Muslims, they aspire for lofty aspirations, lofty goals. These are three individuals that we find the hadith al-Qudsi that we want to touch upon today before the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Three types of individuals. We find a hadith, إِنَّ أَوَّلَ النَّاسِ يُقْضَى يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ عَلَيْهَا. The first three asnaf, the three types of individuals that will be judged on the day of judgment, will not be هَؤُلَاءِ الْكَفَرَةِ, will not be the disbelieving individuals, will not be the munafiqun, will not be the hypocrites. It will be from amongst the Muslims. The first three types of categories that we find people will be judged on the day of judgment. These are three categories that yesterday that you find Muslims aspire to be like those individuals. And today even more so that we find Muslims aspire to be like these individuals. But look at the state of these individuals. This is a fine line between Iman and Kufr. It is a fine line between you going to paradise or to the hellfire. When people begin to say or to begin to think that these are trivial affairs, this is the whole essence of the life of a Muslim. It's the whole essence what exists inside the heart of the individual that makes that fine distinction, whether a person will be rewarded or whether a person will be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to refresh our memory, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this hadith. The first individual is rajulun istushhida fi sabilillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first person who will come on the day of judgment will be the martyr, the one who slayed in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or we said to this individual, what did you do? This individual will say, qataltu fi sabili, I fought in your path, I've done everything to fight and strive inside your path. But it will be said to this individual, kadhabta, you lied. You done this action to be said that you are jarih. Jarih bima'na that you are shuja', you are courageous, you are a brave individual. Waqad qil, this is what was said about you. فَصُحِبَ عَلَى وَجِهِ فَدَخَلَ فِي النَّارِ أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. This person will be dragged on his face and thrown into the hellfire. If we go back and we analyze what even exists among some of our society even today that we find, we're not going to deny the call of jihad fi sabilillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا شَكْ فِي ذَلِكَ. There's no doubt about that. Al-jihad مَاضٍ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ. Jihad will remain there until the day of judgment. الَّذِينَ يَغْلِقُونَ الْكُتُبِ, those who close the books, or close these abwab, or close these chapters, or close this chapter, or close this history. It's not closed. Because the hadith states al-jihad madin ila yawm al-qiyamah. Al-jihad anwa. Jihad will remain until the day of judgment. Anyone who tries to close the chapters or close the books or to make ta'wil or to reinterpret it, this person has got khalal fi aqa'idihim, has got deficiency inside their belief towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's been prescribed and legislated in its time, in its place, with restriction, with condition, and it remains there until the day of judgment. But what concerns us is that we find amongst People may take offense to some of our young individuals that we find in their zeal, in their passion. What is their purpose? What is their intent in what they want to do inside their lives? That you find maybe lived a life of disobedience, disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to see that this is possibly a way out, a way to alleviate myself, to bring me out of the sins that I've carried out inside my life. This may be a good intention that we find inside the heart of the individual, but the long-term goal, the long-term intention, is it one to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is it one, as we find that even the Prophet people came and asked this question? A person الذي يقاتل حمية, a person شجاعة, a person fights for their qawm, عصبية, for their family, for their lineage, for passion. Is this person in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The person who fights in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, الذي يقاتل الذي يجاهد لتكون كلمة الله هي العليا, is the one who fights, who struggles, that the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is supreme, is lofty. That's we find in other hadith that we find a person who fights for other reasons that we find to be known as a brave individual, a courageous individual. لا أجر له, لا أجر له. There is no reward for that individual. There is no reward for that individual. Why has such harsh wording been mentioned? Why will this be the first individual that we find on the day of judgment, these type of individuals will be judged? We find al-jihad, darwatu salami al-jihad, the most pinnacle point of Islam that we find. The peak element is to strive and to struggle. Thus the reward is multiplied. Thus you find it's not for every single individual. That's the Quran. It mentions that Allah takes shuhada. Allah takes the martyrs from amongst you. Allah selects and chooses those individuals. It's not something trivial. It's not something belittling that every individual thinks that they will be selected and chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So thus a person needs to rectify their intention. For what intention want to carry out these actions inside their life. The second type of individual that we find, once again, Muslims aspire to be like such individuals. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those individuals. Al-ulama, those who are the scholars that we find, or the person who recites the Quran proficiently that we find. Once again, this individual, it will be said to this individual, what did you do with the knowledge that was given to you? What did you do with the Quran that was given to you? This person will say, I studied the knowledge to teach the people, to benefit the people reciting the Quran. Kadhabta, you lied. You learned this knowledge. لقد يقول أنت عالم, أنت شيخ. To say that you're a scholar, you're an imam, أنت مجتهد, أنت قارئ, you're a reciter of the Quran. وقد قيل. This is what was said about you. It's said about you. You wanted this inside your life. You will be dragged in your face and thrown into Jahannam. Thus we find talabul ilmi, the searching of ilm, ilmu shari that we find, the study of religious sciences that we find. Look at the severe warning that we placed there. A person who studies religious science, man ta'allama ilman, whoever studies knowledge, مما يبتغى به وجه الله سبحانه وتعالى, with that knowledge trying to seek the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but doesn't seek the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لا يتعلم إلا ليصيب به عرضا من الدنيا, only seeks that knowledge to gain something from this dunya, or seeks that knowledge, that person seeks the benefit of his knowledge, will not see لم يجد عرف الجنة, will not see بمعاريحها, will not even smell the fragrance of paradise. Whoever seeks knowledge for the purpose of the people, or to twist that knowledge for the benefit of the people, or as we say in today's term, actually based on tradition, sells their deen for a bowl of rice. For a bowl of rice, sells their deen, changes the sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or commands people with evil, or conceals the truth, or doesn't practice what they preach inside their lives. We find that individual searching that knowledge is in a severe warning. Likewise, we find another warning inside many hadith in the Sunan of Abi Dawood that we find. Whoever seeks knowledge, man talaba al-ilm liyumari bihi sufaha, whoever seeks knowledge just to mesmerize the foolish individuals, only yujadil bihi al-ulama, or to argue with the ulama, or the people will turn their faces and look at this individual. An-nar, the Prophet said about this individual, the fire. Look at this severe strict warning that we find. Today we find kullu man habba wa dabba, every single individual, huwa alim, every single individual, he's a scholar, he's like this, he's like that. لا يفهم شيء من الشريعة الله سبحانه وتعالى, doesn't understand anything from the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يفتي للناس, he gives religious verdicts upon the people. يستحل دم الناس, person makes it halal for the spilling of a blood of another Muslim. Ya ikhwan, this is not something belittled. This is not just giving a religious verdict whether this is halal or haram. Even that is severe. That is severe. But to highlight that this is halal to take this person's life, it's halal to spill the blood of this individual. وَأَصْلُهُ أَنَّهُ Muslim, and this individual is a Muslim. أَنْتَ تُبِيحْ قَتْلَهُ, you allow to kill this individual. You have got some severe issues to answer the day of judgment in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No individual should belittle that, because Damul Muslim haramun.
The blood of a Muslim is haram, is sanctified, is precious, is honored. No individual can allow the spilling of the blood of any Muslim. No individual. No individual should have the audacity to come out in the public domain. وَمَا عِنْدَهُ عِلْمٍ. Person doesn't have the knowledge, doesn't have the ability, doesn't have the credentials. وَيَسْتَحِلُّ دَمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَأَمْوَالِهِمْ. Allows that their blood can be spilled, their money can be taken, they can be punished, they can be tortured, they can be oppressed. لا يجوز أبدا في شريعة الله سبحانه وتعالى. Never will be allowed. And none of the ulama will ever allow that inside their lives, to spill the blood of an innocent Muslim. This is not something trivial that some of us Muslims today we're pushing out inside the society. يُعَيِّدُ الْكُفَّارِ. This individual, he helps the disbelieving, or this individual sits with a disbeliever, or this individual speaks with a disbeliever, or this individual aids this disbeliever. لا يجوز Abadan. It's not allowed for the average individual to come out in the public domain and they spill the blood of this individual. A Muslim should be very careful in what they have to answer for in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially about the subject that exists upon this dunya. So this is a severe warning about those individuals who want people to turn to them and to look at them. Ulama are not dead inside this world. Ulama are not dead inside this world. Ilm will remain there with those individuals. في صدورهم وفي أعمالهم. Inside their chest, inside their actions. People have a deep for us understanding. Not for our own personal interest. Interest of the Muslim sanctity. Interest of the Muslim ummah. That is what concerns a real Muslim. Is how to protect every single individual. That there is no more bloodshed. There's no more hardship. There's no more difficulty upon this Muslim ummah. The third type of individual that we find is the person who is Jawad. Jawad, the person who is a generous individual. We said to this individual, what did you do with the wealth that we bestowed upon you? This wealth is the wealth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tubtilu sadaqatikum bil manni wal adha. Or you believe? Don't destroy your sadaqah. Don't destroy the giving of your wealth, the giving of charity by a good deed. What does that mean? You help another individual. You help the masjid. You help the community. You help them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But every time you meet them, or every time something begins to take place, you say, don't you remember that I gave £10,000 to the masjid? Don't you remember I done this for you? Don't you remember I done this for the imam? Don't you remember I done this for the community? If you done it sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لماذا تسأل الناس? Why do you let the people know? Why do you remind the people? أخلصوا نياتكم. Be sincere towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You done something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Purify your intentions for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No need to express it inside society إلا أن يكون فائدة, unless there's a benefit. تشجيع الناس, to encourage another individual to spend in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to do a good deed. That's allowed inside the Sharia. But those are the type of individuals, may Allah take us far away from such individuals who hope and spend their wealth so that people may begin to praise them, or they get known inside society that is a person who helps other individuals. That's you find, ليس على نفس شيء أشق من الإخلاص. The most difficult thing upon any individual is sincerity. It's the most difficult thing to find inside the heart of the individual. أي شيء أعز في الدنيا. What's the most difficult thing inside this dunya? Is al-ikhlas. Is to find moments of sincerity inside the life. وَكَمْ أَجْتَهِدْ فِي إِسْقَاطِ الرِّيَا. How often I try to break, showing off, rectify my intention inside in my heart, as some of the ulama of Salaf, tazkir, they highlight it. And qalbi, to remove it from my heart. وَكَأَنَّهُ يَنْبَتُ فِيهِ عَلَى لَوْنٍ آخَرٍ. But unfortunately it begins to grow in another color inside my heart. Every time I remove it, I pluck it out, I take it out, it begins to come in another format inside my life. This is how these individuals saw the importance of rectifying their hearts, rectifying their souls in a state of purification in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَقُولُوا قَوْلِ هَذَا وَأَسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لِي وَلَكُمْ وَلِجَمِيعِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوهُ إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ.
الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. Now we begin to understand that some of these ulama, they begin to write or highlight تعلموا النية فإنها أبلغ من العمل. Learn the importance of intention because it has a far more credential or far more importance in getting your action being accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's that we know the importance of having the right intention and to carry out the right action, the sunnah. That's why people, there are two extremes to this. Some people are sincere, but their actions are against the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Some people, their actions are according to the sunnah, but they're not sincere in the actions that they're doing. We need to work together to rectify our intentions and to rectify our actions. Our intentions are sincere for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our actions are also in correspondence with the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. That is the ultimate form of success that we find. It's quite, sorry to use the word, quite basic, but something we all need to understand inside our lives, because many people try to create obstacles or reinterpretations. Be sincere and follow the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Don't just suffice by saying I'm a sincere individual, then I can practice how I want to practice my Islam, or to do actions of sunnah and not be sincere and to look down upon al-ikhwa, how look the brothers around you or the Muslim community around you. We all need to work together, rectify our intentions, rectify our actions, to be those individuals who get the maximum reward via our intentions and a maximum reward via actions as well. Sufyan al-Thawri mentioned, مَا عَالَجْتُ شَيْئًا أَشَدَّ عَلَيَّ مِنْ نِيَّتِي لِأَنَّهَا تَتَقَلَّبْ عَلَيَّ. He said, I've never been able to cure anything more difficult than the intention inside my heart, because it always begins to waver, it always begins to change. And here as a side point, it should be highlighted that if a person decides to do a good action, persist inside that good action. Don't stop doing that action. If a person is reading the Quran, reading some extra nawafil, wants to give charity, wants to do something, if people discover it or people visualize you, ulama of tazkiyah have said, you have to remain patient and carry on doing the action. Don't give it up now. Because now if you give it up, the shaitan has got the better of you. The shaitan has got the better of you. Persist inside the action, carry it out, and rectify your intention inside your heart. تَخْلِيصُ النِّيَّةِ مِنْ فَسَادِهَا. To purify the intention from its corruption. أَشَدُّ عَلَى الْعَامِلِينَ مِنْ طُولِ الْإِجْتِهَادِ. This is more severe, more difficult for a person who makes ijtihad. For a person who comes and derives Islamic rulings, what is more difficult than that? And we know that making ijtihad is something very, very difficult. None, at the moment, you don't find hardly any of the ulama who reach that level of being a mujtahid, an open mujtahid in the sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what is even more difficult than that is takhlisun niyyah, is to purify your intention upon this dunya. Thus you find salah al-qalbi, the rectification of one's heart, bi salah al-amal, will be rectified with good action of the individual. Wa salah al-amali bi salah al-niyyah. And rectification of the actions will be via rectification of the intention inside the heart of the individual. Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad mentioned, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ مِنْكَ نِيَّتَكَ وَإِرَادَتَكَ. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you is your intention and your intent. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. Even those people, may Allah bless them, who are going to be traveling to the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allah facilitate and make that easy for them. These are the guests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We find the Quran mentions, لَن يَنَالَ اللَّهَ لُحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. It's not the flesh and the blood, the sacrificing of those animals that we find on the days of Ayyam al-Tashriq, that reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your taqwa. Is the consciousness inside your heart is lifted and brought to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what goes, these millions of people who go there. Externally, these actions that they do, of fatigue and tiredness that we find, al-mashaqqa, difficulty that we find, as we find the jihad al-mar'a, that we find jihad for woman is al-hajj, is the hajj that we find. And there's no less reward for that individual who performs the hajj, is Jannah. All their sins are wiped away, returns back like a newborn baby. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for those individuals who made that intention to become guests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. Make that effort to travel to the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَنْ دَخَلَهُ كَانَ آمِنًا. Whoever enters in the precincts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, كَانَ آمِنًا, in a state of peace and tranquility and rest. And as we find, we made this house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala مَثَابَةَ النَّاسِ وَأَمْنًا. This is a house, one house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whenever you see that house, whenever you enter that house, that love enters into your heart, to return back, to frequent the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah facilitate it to make us one day the guests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to enter that house in a state of peace and security and aman, to protect the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. الَّذِينَ يَكِيدُونَ بِتَدْمِيرِهِ. Those individuals who want to plot and plan to destroy, to destabilize the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we will protect His house. Inside Surah Quraysh that we find a lesson to those individuals, that sometimes we may get over worried about Islam, about the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who will protect His home, who will protect His people,
who protect those individuals who live according to Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They may be downtrodden, they may be taken away from this dunya, but in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, maqamuhum al-ulya, their position, their rank, and their remembrance is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those individuals who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a state of secrecy, in a state of in the open, in the public domain. Make us those individuals who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to bestow His blessings upon us, zahiran wa batinan, externally and internally inside our lives, and we begin to find that contentment in our intention of serving only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As if يجب على الإنسان تخليص نيته بعمله وقلبه. The person بقوله, the person exerts all the effort inside their life to purify their action, purify their words, purify everything inside their heart to serve only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we find in conclusion hadith al-Bukhari. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالْخَوَاتِيمِ. Indeed, actions are to be judged according to their ending. We become an ummah, a nation, a people who are always worried about other individuals. What will happen to other individuals? Or we see something inside them or say something about them. Look at the prophetic tradition. Hadith al-Bukhari. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالْخَوَاتِيمِ. Indeed, action will be judged via the ending. It is a good ending that a person should seek from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person is lifted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon that action. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم ربنا أفرغ علينا صبرا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين قوموا لصلاتكم يرحمكم الله